Well, let's talk about the future of British conservatism in the company of a knight of the realm, no less, the former Conservative MP for Lichfield, Sir Michael Fabricant. Michael, welcome to the Mark Dolan Show.
Well, thank you very much. And I enjoy working with you, as you know, on another medium. We won't mention its name. And I'm glad to be working on this new medium with you.
Brilliant. Well, listen, I'm hoping that you'll make some headlines for us today on the Mark Dolan Show and that I can get an exclusive. When are you joining Reform UK?
Ah, well, I don't plan to do it, but I'm very, very concerned, actually, that you've got Nigel Farage and Richard Tice and Rupert Lowe coming up with ideas. And at the moment, the Conservative Party isn't devoid of ideas. But the Conservative Party's not saying to anybody what those ideas are. And I don't know how long that's going to be sustainable for, to be honest.
Indeed. I mean, Kemi Baddenoch is arguing that she wants to listen to the grassroots. She wants to engage with ordinary people, ordinary voters. She's got 4 years to get this policy platform together. Are you not persuaded by that?
No, that's the groupthink. And I think it's a groupthink which really came to its conclusion many, many years ago when it was a straight Conservative versus Labour fight. But it isn't that now. We've got a real struggle on the right for who the right should be. Should it be the Conservative Party or should it be Reform? And certainly at the moment, Reform has the momentum. And with the danger with that is that when one party has momentum and the other one doesn't, it's very hard to break it. I think actually it's being rather complacent, naive, and not modern at all, actually, to consider that the old model that used to be perfectly okay in the 1950s will work now. It doesn't.
You backed Robert Jenrick for the leadership. Are you feeling vindicated?
Robert has his strengths, but he has his weaknesses. He looks like Tory boy, the way he's got himself up at the moment. Now, I'm not saying he should have really long hair like me, but I'm not saying anyone is perfect. The sad thing, the worrying thing, is I'm not actually sure who might make a great leader. But at least Robert Jenrick is doing something, doing lots of videos, coming up with ideas, and saying what he would do as Justice Secretary. Now, that's only one small, relatively small department in government. Really, Kemi Baddenoch as shadow prime minister, well, we hope shadow prime minister as leader of the Conservative Party, she should be saying what the Conservative Party intends to do. And I've made my views very clear on various Conservative Party WhatsApp groups.
Is Kemi Baddenoch lazy?
That's an interesting question. I mean, some of my colleagues have said she was lazy when she was in government. I just don't know. I didn't work with her directly in government, so I don't know whether she's lazy or not. I don't think it's laziness, though, which is causing her not to come up with policies. I think she just genuinely believes that the old 1950s model applies today. Well, it doesn't. And the trouble is, you get this groupthink, whether it's in companies or whether it's in political parties. And the present groupthink, I think, is very old-fashioned and just doesn't work. As I say, you've got, I was going to say Reform biting at the ankles of the Conservative Party. Actually, it's got to the stage at the moment where we need to be biting at the ankles of the Reform Party. Because certainly evidence I've seen suggests that they're ahead. Now, look, Reform, rather like the Lib Dems before 2010 when they went into coalition with the government, are in an easy position. They've never been in government. They can make all sorts of promises. And actually, they're not making that many promises. Reform are talking about immigration and other matters that count to a lot of people, including me. But I'm not aware that they've said a great deal about education or the NHS or some of these other government departments. But, you know, it's one thing saying something in opposition, which they are, but if they were to come into government, either in coalition or even as a government themselves, they would have to do something very different from what they're promising at the moment. So it could actually be the destruction of Reform if we got to that. So, you know, I think what I'm saying is that the Conservative Party should certainly not make rash promises like Reform are saying. But on the other hand, they've got to make some promises and get on with it. Otherwise, Reform will be so far ahead, we'll be going into coalition with them, just like the Lib Dems had to go into coalition with the Conservative Party back in 2010.
Well, Michael, you're an entrepreneur as well as a politician. Reform UK simply saw a gap in the market, didn't they? A gap in the Conservative market for lower taxes, border control, and tackling extreme political correctness. Absolutely shocking that this has happened on the watch of the Conservatives. Reform UK are a monster of the Conservatives' making.
Yes, that's true. Although I would say, and I'm going to defend the Conservative Party here, the government, the Conservative government, was in government at a time when, so many political parties in government around the world found they were tackling, the twin evils of Putin invading Ukraine, which caused a huge economic shock, and of course the COVID crisis, and everyone sort of yawns when we say that, but the COVID crisis cost over £600 billion, so £500 billion. And what with the Ukraine thing, we think it's cost over £1 trillion. And that's why we've seen the unpopularity not only of the Conservatives in the UK, but also the Democrats in the US, Macron's party in France, Olaf Scholz's party in Germany. I could go on, but I won't because that would be boring. So, yes, Reform certainly took advantage of it all. But the trouble with the Conservative Party, I think, in the last administration was that we were too broad a coalition. And what do I mean by that? Well, you had people like me who truly believed in Brexit and wanted to get things done in a particular way. But there was a substantial side of the party who rebelled against all that, didn't want to see us take real advantage of Brexit, and we haven't taken real advantage of Brexit, to be honest, cutting regulation and all the rest of it. And Labour saw the advantage and voted with Conservative rebels. So the whole thing was a rather bland compromise. And it was that which Reform has exploited. And you know what? I can't blame them.
What about Boris Johnson and his effective open borders policy, presiding over almost 1 million people entering the country at net legal migration within a year?
Well, he inherited that, but that's no excuse. He should have.
Although Dominic Cummings is clear that he, orchestrated those numbers because, he somehow wasn't as strict on immigration as other Conservative prime ministers might have been. Plus, of course, Boris was fully signed up to net zero, which is proving ruinous for the British economy.
Absolutely right. On the migration thing, you had the Treasury saying, look, we're not going to get economic growth unless we have skilled people in the UK. Now, I go with that. But the problem is, it meant that their families and extended families could come with them. Now, that resulted in the huge immigration that we see now. Now, that's being cut back slowly, or was being cut back slowly. I'm not quite sure what Labour are doing in that respect. And then, of course, we had the illegal immigration, as they do in the United States. I remember only a few days ago, Donald Trump was talking about we have 350 million. But then he said something like, well, it could be 360 million. We don't know. We don't know how many illegal immigrants there are in the US. And that's certainly the case in the UK. I think our population is around 70 million, not the 65 million. That's the official figure.
You think that the UK population is significantly higher than records suggest?
I do. And you can see it by the strain on our public services, the number of people who find it difficult to see a GP, the strain when you get to an A&E, if, God forbid, you have to go to A&E. Problems with overcrowding at schools. We're not keeping in touch. That's not the word. We're not keeping in track. We're not keeping up with the actual size of the real population in the UK as opposed to what civil servants might think it is.
Oh, well, I think that's deeply troubling, isn't it? That is a state that is not even fit for purpose. Where do you think is a good sort of landing point for immigration? What would be an appropriate number for legal net migration within a year, Michael?
Well, I have haven't done the research. I suspect a reform person would say, one is too many, or maybe they'll come up with a figure of 100,000. I just don't know. What I do know is that people who come to this country should, first of all, we should have taken into account how many people are coming in when it comes to public services. And I'll say another thing, which may be controversial, and that is people who do come to this country should accept our traditions, our mores, as they say. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. And I'm afraid there is a portion of our community who don't accept that, are not prepared to integrate, not prepared to learn the language. And really, that is not what we want to see in the United Kingdom. We've got a lot of faults, but you know what? We never had the sort of terrors that happened in the 20th century in Central Europe. Even France, by the way, it cannot feel completely, redeemed or whatever, as we celebrate at the moment, if celebrate's the word, I don't think it is, a National Holocaust Day. The French behaved appallingly during the Second World War, deporting people that even the Germans didn't request to be deported. We did nothing like that. I mean, Britain was actually a pretty decent country by 20th century standards, and indeed 19th and 18th century standards. What do I mean by that? People go on about, Britain was involved, various people were involved in the slave trade. Well, we abolished the slave trade long before the United States and other European countries, and we can be proud about that. It's no good judging by today's standards how people behaved 100, 200, 300 years ago. There, I've given you a very long answer, and I didn't answer your question. Typical.
Well, no, I thought it was a very absorbing answer. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, going back to the 14 years of Conservative rule, and you're absolutely right to point out the pandemic, the war in Ukraine. And of course, even if you go back to 2010, the Conservatives had to deal with the legacy of the credit crunch. And I think that coalition government with the Liberal Democrats were actually very underrated. I think they got the deficit as a percentage of the economy down from 10% to 2% in 5 years. So I thought they were an effective administration. Good things were done by various Conservative prime ministers. But clearly, the failure of the multicultural experiment and the vast numbers, both legally and illegally, have all happened under Conservative rule. So why should my viewers and listeners believe that the Tories can change?
Well, it's a good question, and I'm not sure there's an answer at present. I mean, why should anyone vote Conservative? Well, first of all, we have the policies, except we don't at the moment, because Kemi Baddenoch hasn't told us any. But we should have better policies and much broader policies than reform, because reform, as I said at the moment, we're just talking about immigration, one or two other law and order, and that's basically all I hear from them, which are fair enough, but there's a lot more to government than just that. And why should they? Well, of course, it's always a problem when you've been in government for 14 years. Normally, governments change after about 10 years. 14 years is a long time, so I wasn't that surprised when I lost my seat, knowing that reform was there. Although, interestingly, the vote on the right in Lichfield, in other words, the Conservative and Reform vote combined, was massively more than the Labour Lib Dem vote. So, why should they vote? Because we'll have the policies. Right now, we don't.
Or what about the sort of the political philosophy of the party, though? Because I spoke to Anne Widdecombe a few months ago, and she said that she left the Conservatives because they became a left-wing party. They shifted left. And she said, and I quote, that they are institutionally woke. We know the values and philosophy of Reform UK are truly conservative. And isn't that the problem? That yes, Kemi Baddenoch might have some attractive policies, but many of my viewers and listeners won't risk giving their vote to a party that culturally is irredeemably now left-wing.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't go so far as to say that, but the other point I was going to make in answer to...
signed up to the social democratic consensus that we've seen on the continent.
Yeah. We're too broad a coalition. That's the problem. Whether we are now, I don't know, with just 120 or 121 MPs. But we were too broad a coalition, and I alluded to that actually earlier on in another answer to your question, why
Yeah.
Boris and others couldn't get legislation through.
I mean, what, just to call a spade, you're saying that too many lefties have infiltrated the party, the so-called Tory wets, the One Nation crowd.
My best friend, who will be nameless, and I were having a conversation over dinner about this the other night. He's quite well known. He would regard himself as being, I think he said, I was originally the Tory Reform Group at Oxford, and, we are the original Conservative Party, not you, Michael. And then we changed the subject because there's a lot of things that he and I disagree on. But, yeah, have we always been like that? I don't know. Did we drift to the left in Anne Widdecombe's time? I don't know. I mean, I love Anne, but she is pretty, how can I put it, traditional in some respects, because, of course, she left the Anglican Church, which she was a member of, and joined the Roman Catholics, which is one extreme to another, I think, over women priests. Now, I'm not criticising her for that, but the question is, are we too broad a church? That has certainly been the problem, I think, ever since Brexit.
And probably right. And Margaret Thatcher spent the first 5 years of her premiership fighting the Tory wets. She was ultimately victorious, but it was a battle that it looks like Kemi Baddenoch needs to have in the next 4 years.
That's right. I mean, it's tricky. It's going to be according to, we've only got 121 MPs, as I said, and it's going to be now very key how they select the candidates where they think they're going to win. If they select a load of people who are very wet, then I don't like going back to these old-fashioned words, but it does actually describe it. Although I remember when I got into the Parliament back in 1992, people couldn't work out what the hell I was, because I've been always very socially liberal, but very dry on things like Europe, law and order,
the economy,
and military and other issues like that.
Taxation.
So wet and dry isn't certainly wet and dry of Thatcher's time is not the sort of exact epithets to use. Let's just stick to, I don't know, left.
Well, listen, Michael, all I can say is I hope you're wet today. Now, can we talk about Nigel Farage? We know what a skillful politician he is, but what's your appraisal of him as a human being?
He enjoys life. I think sometimes, like me, he plays at life. He's currently playing at being a politician, which he enjoys. Playing is nothing wrong, by the way. Playing is a method of learning, as any clinical psychiatrist will tell you. Whether he would make a good prime minister or not, I don't know. He might make a brilliant prime minister. I think that Trump has the potential of making a brilliant president, though he also has the potential of being an absolute disaster, rather like Boris Johnson, one way or the other, either brilliant or not. What he's certainly not going to be is like Theresa May, who's steady as she goes, and that's not a bad thing, but at times when you're trying to make changes, steady as she goes isn't really good enough, although she was handicapped by, as I say, trying to govern two separate parties, the left and the right, the wets and the dries. Nigel Farage certainly has got fantastic personality. I'm not quite sure where reform would be without Nigel Farage, actually. If it was just Richard Tice running it, or if it were Rupert Lowe or whatever. I think that, as a person, though, he's a good bloke. Gets angry at times, which is a side we don't see, likes to run things, doesn't want to see anybody else having any influence when he disagrees with a particular topic. Maybe that's a good aspect of leadership. Or you could say that in a parliamentary democracy, that isn't so good. Not so sure about that last thing, though. I think sometimes you do want a leader, just like Margaret Thatcher.
Well, I share your views on Nigel, and I've worked with Nigel, of course, for a number of years, and he's very liked by his producers. He's an absolute gentleman and a very, very talented guy. But here's my question for you. You sort of mentioned that we don't know too much of what reform would do in government, and they've said that they'll stop the boats, so they'll simply turn the boats around. Well, there's a big legal question hanging over that. And also,
If I may just say, there's a big
yeah,
practical problem about that too. First of all, they're low in the water, as we well know, because of the drownings. It's actually quite difficult to detect them. So,
yeah.
when you've got reasonable amount of wave height, they're not detectable on radar. That's why the Royal Marines use that type of boat, so they're undetectable. They're also very unstable, and the Royal Navy have made it absolutely clear that if we try and nudge these boats to turn them around, they'll capsize.
Yeah.
And they're certainly not going to leave them drowning in the water. So what will happen? We'll end up picking them up again. So, yeah, stop the boats. Easy to say, not so easy to do. And this was the thing. The Lib Dems, before the 2010 election, were saying we're going to stop tuition fees. As soon as they got into government, found that saying that easy phrase actually wasn't very practical and couldn't be done. So I'm afraid just stopping the boats was never going to be achievable. And I told Rishi Sunak at the time, why the hell we said stop the boats? And he said, because the focus group said it's a popular thing to say. And I said, yeah, but if you don't stop them, you're not going to be very popular at all.
No, and of course that came to pass in July, didn't it? But you're right about the danger, the risks, the practicalities of turning these boats around. Also, the big question about whether the French will take them back as well. So that begs the question, notwithstanding your admiration for Nigel Farage, but is he a snake oil salesman?
We don't know. It certainly is about stopping the boats, because for all the reasons I've just given. Is he a snake oil salesman? If Reform, I mean, it's a hell of a mountain to climb for Reform to actually be the lead party in Parliament and therefore have Nigel Farage's government. And the danger he faces, as I said earlier, is like Nick Clegg in 2010 when he got into government, couldn't deliver, or indeed like Keir Starmer, who said no more taxes, and he uttered that famous phrase, read my lips. Well, we read his lips, and we now know that Keir Starmer was a liar, because he must have known what he had to do. And that's the danger, of course. Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are now hitting new low depths, which previously, had not been the case and never had happened so quickly in the history of polling. That is the danger that Nigel Farage faces if he makes promises which he can't keep.
I agree. I think Keir Starmer's period in opposition was about making headlines, about saying what people want to hear. There was clearly no plan for government. Proof of that is the tax rate on pensioners, farmers and private schools, which have been incredibly unpopular and counterproductive. And we've seen growth shrink from 0.7% in January under the aforementioned Rishi Sunak, 0.7%, number one in the G7, to 0.1% now, and Britain flirting with recession. But here's a question for you. Will Labour, Sir Michael, get better at government in the years ahead? Can Keir Starmer turn this around?
Yeah, I haven't written Labour Party off yet. They've got 4 years to go. The plan was, but I don't think it's necessarily going to happen. The plan was that you tax them hard now, the population forgets, when in 2 or 3 years' time, taxes reduce substantially and people feel a lot better off in a run-up to the general election. But I don't think people are quite so gullible nowadays. And actually, there's a very real fear that that plan of Labour's isn't going to work anyway, because, I've got some figures here. 11,000 millionaires have left the country over the last few months. The top 1% of earners actually generate 30% of all the income tax that we collect. Now, with them going, we're stuffed. And if we don't get growth, which is what Rachel Reeves is now going on and on about, surprise, surprise, we haven't heard that before, without growth, she's going to have to add to taxes and cut back on services, far from that Labour plan from working. They might make it and become more popular as we approach the next general election, or it could get worse and worse. If it starts to get worse and worse, Keir Starmer is quite renowned, actually, for throwing people under the bus. I think he'll get rid of Rachel Reeves. When that doesn't really make much difference, I think the backbenchers will say, we've had enough of you, mate, and they'll try and get rid of Keir Starmer. Easier said than done in the Labour Party. They don't have quite the structure and rules that we have, votes of no confidence. But, you know, they got rid of some would say, a very good Prime Minister, for all his faults, Tony Blair. They got rid of him and brought in Gordon Brown. And we know the result. You got a David Cameron government in 2010 as a consequence. Yeah, be interesting to see how things pan out over the next.
I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, you were in the Commons for many years, for the entirety of Keir
32.
Starmer's time there. Well, 22, and I think Starmer's been in the
32.
Commons. How long Starmer's been in the Commons? Only since I think the mid 2010s. So, what's your appraisal of him as a politician? What are his qualities?
His qualities are he's cool and calculating, but he has more weaknesses than qualities. As a politician, his main weakness is the inability to connect with other human beings. You know, when he was a barrister, he'd be good at presenting arguments to a judge, but useless at convincing a jury. And similarly, you see it now on television. He just doesn't connect. He just doesn't get it. His whole behaviour over the Southport thing, where he just turns up, lays a few flowers, doesn't speak to any of the victims' parents, and runs off as quickly as he could. His whole manner of doing press conferences, his recent press conference, he has a droning, rather boring voice, and nobody seems to be able to give him training in that direction. He doesn't connect. And if you don't connect with the public, then you ain't going to be a good politician.
And was he wrong to allow a perception to get hold that if you protested about the triple murder in Southport, that you were somehow far right?
Absolutely wrong to say far right. I'm not condoning the way people protested, throwing missiles at policemen, setting fires to vehicles. That was a riot, and riots are not acceptable. But to say that people who are not woke, people who are prepared to say there is a problem with a small section, but nevertheless a significant section, of those who've immigrated or emigrated to the United Kingdom over the last few years, to say that they're far right, if you express those concerns, that was wrong, because the majority of the population are concerned. Look, let's be honest about this. Look, there have been a number of terror incidents over the last few years in this country. They haven't been done by atheists or agnostics. They haven't been done by Anglicans or Catholics. They haven't been done by Jewish people. They have all been done by people influenced by extreme Islam. Now, many an imam might say, well, you know, the Quran doesn't teach that. But the problem is there are imams and others who do teach that, in breach of the Quran or whatever, in breach of the fundamentals of their religion or whatever. But there is a flaw there, and it's influencing, I think, a small but significant minority of Muslims living in this country. And that's a problem that we have to address. It won't go away by burying our heads in the sand.
Michael, did you celebrate Donald Trump's inauguration?
Well, you know, I go to America a lot, and I'm going to admit something to you. By the way, I'm wearing my American tie, so I'm sort of celebrating now.
It's very fetching.
I go to America a lot, and I remember being in a little place called Provincetown, which is right on the tip of Cape Cod in Massachusetts, heart of Democrat country, and saying, oh, Trump won't win, you know, and if I was an American, I'd vote for Kamala Harris, not because she's particularly good, but because she's a safe pair of hands. Boring pair of hands, but anyway, there you go. Now, I am over the moon about Trump. It all may go horribly wrong, but what he's done and said and the way he goes about it, I just think if only, what a contrast, if only we had somebody like that in the United Kingdom. The most recent thing being was where he expelled people to illegal immigrants back to Colombia. And the Colombian airport said, right, you're not going to land. So the planes had to turn back. These were military transports. They clearly had enough fuel. They probably knew this was going to happen. Anyway, they turned around and went back. And he said, right, that's fine. We will now put extreme sanctions on Colombia. We're going to make sure they go bust as a government within the next 12 to 24 months. And if that's the way you want to play it, we'll do it that way. And then within a few hours, Colombia said, OK, we'll take these guys back. I mean, that is, that I thought was pretty impressive.
That's leadership. That's leadership.
But the only thing that Trump has done, which rather disappointed me, was when he was in a press huddle on Air Force One, he told the BBC, oh, Keir Starmer, he's a great guy. And I know full well that the White House don't think that at all. Still, I suppose he was being diplomatic.
I think he was being diplomatic. Listen, fingers crossed he can be a successful president and be a good flag bearer for conservatism in the West. Because if things go horribly wrong, if inflation goes up, if the economy crashes, if he can't deal with illegal immigration, then it's going to bite everyone on the bum that's on the right, isn't it?
It will indeed. I just hope, by the way, that Trump is very, very firm with Starmer about the Chagos Islands. It is amazing that we are even giving it away, and B, that we're paying the Mauritians to give it away. I mean, have you heard of such a thing? Now, Labour will say the Conservatives started the process. Yes, they did. The government started the process because there had been a ruling against us in the International Court. But actually, in fairness to Rishi Sunak, he stopped it going any further. There was no intention to do anything but just sit on it and kick the can down the road. And when you look at this international court, which we're signed up to, but the Americans aren't, most of them are, just like the United Nations, from minority small countries, which are developing countries, which have the majority in the court and also in the United Nations, and are determined to exercise power over countries like the United Kingdom and the United States. We should do what the Americans did and have nothing to do with them. After all, I voted for Brexit, for Britain to be a sovereign nation. And that doesn't include outside courts, outside the United Kingdom, from dictating to us, whether it be the International Court or indeed the European Court of Human Rights. As I said earlier on, we have nothing to be ashamed of as a nation in our behaviour in respect of human rights and our rule of law. English legal system is used throughout the United States on a federal basis. Virtually all of the states of the United States, apart from Louisiana, use English law. And I know who our friends are. It's the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, common law, common legal system, something we can be proud of.
Most definitely, the Chagos Islands sellout is absolutely mind-boggling, and I hope that actually President Trump will block it, because it just makes no sense whatsoever. Michael, before you go, you left the House of Commons in July. Are you enjoying your newfound freedom?
Yes, I mean, I'm travelling a lot. I'm in Lichfield at the moment, but I spend some time in London. I spend some time where I have a holiday home in Wales, in common with a lot of people from Lichfield, so I don't feel as if I've gone too far away from Lichfield, except I'm in the mountains and not in the Trent Valley, which is what I am at the moment. And as I say, I go abroad a lot to the United States, and been away to Cyprus. I'm off soon to Los Angeles. So I'm enjoying life, but I want to have a bit of purpose to it. I want to get back into broadcasting a bit more, and let's see whether that develops or not. But at least
I think you're being courted by some of the biggest networks in the country, and rightly so, because you are a former politician with vast experience, but a great broadcaster as well, and most importantly, a real character. And there aren't enough of those in modern politics, Michael.
Thank you. It's kind of you to say so, Mark.
Well, listen, there you go. I've got to say, what a coup. A Knight of the Realm on the show, the first Knight of the Realm we've had on the Mark Dolan show. And I do hope you'll return soon, Sir Michael.
Oh, please. Please, I want you to have me back on.